stop what you're doing and pay attention. I'm Officer Dan, and we are proud to introduce, explain, and install Gktech's own Z33 350z, G35, and V35 Super Lock front knuckles. We've packed some serious heat into these things, so where's the heat, bro? Well, let me mushroom stamp that into your forehead. These aren't just knuckles, these are drop knuckles with 30 whole millimeters of roll center correction, which for all you internet suspension gurus out there optimizes your camber gain in both roll and bump. They also have reduced caster built in to give you a contact patch as flat as the world that we live in whilst at full lock, which in turn makes the feedback to the wheel more consistent. We corrected the bump steer to match the roll center correction, as well as added shims to make those adjustable as well. Now to throw some ghost peppers on this fire, we've also increased steering speed and Ackerman adjustment. We've also included the high misalignment common size PTFE line bearings in both ball joint and tie rod end side of things. We have spares available on the website, or you can get them from any bearing supplier worldwide. Hot freaking damn. If you were to take a trip to Devil's Hole, Death Valley at 12 o'clock noon in the middle of summer, it wouldn't be near as hot as the fire I just tossed in your general direction. Moving right along, this is the bits and bobs that actually allow you to bolt the knuck to the car. You get two shanks, each that include top and bottom inserts and top and bottom washers and nuts to suit said shanks. Dan, why on God's flat green earth are those things looking crooked AF? The shanks themselves are as straight as a non-Bud Light drinker, whereas the crack rock inspired inserts are chugging cases of Bud Light on the regs. And don't you worry your pretty little head, this has been done for a reason, which I will get into in a bit. Moving right along to the other bits that you get are our PTFE line rose joints stuffed to the brim with Ackerman and bump steer adjusting goodness. Now, for those of you that don't care what any of that means, I'm gonna break it down anyway. I can't wait to get a golf clap from the one guy in the back that actually knows what this stuff is. Let's start with the Ackerman inserts. If the Ackerman inserts are facing the engine, i.e. towards the inside of the car, you will have more Ackerman, meaning more lead wheel and less trailing wheel, aka more scrub. If you flip the adjuster 180 degrees pointing outwards towards the wheel of the car, you'll end up with less Ackerman and closer to an even leading and trailing, making less scrub for a faster car whilst in drift. Moving right along to the bump steer adjustment. You can move the tie rod upward by putting the two shims at the bottom, or move it downward by putting the two shims up at the top. What you're looking for in this is for the tie rod and the LCA to be parallel. For most people, changing this won't affect much, but for those caviar-eating internet super suspension wizards, this one's for you. If you do want to go down the rabbit hole of bump steer, hit the YouTube for hours of stimulation and/or sleepy time material. If you freaked out for a moment there with all those words and things that I just set it to default and put one washer on each side. Capiche? Now that you have 4th degree burns from all that heat that we just brought, enter our Shop 350z. Now go ahead and trade 4 Pokemon cards to borrow your friend's lift and hoist that bad boy up into the air. Go ahead and remove the wheels you probably paid way too much for and waited 11 months to get, then get looking at the main thing that's been keeping you from getting all of that Formula D spec angle. Now remember kids, if you do go this route, you cannot, must not, shall not run stock LCAs or upper camber arms. It's a huge no-go. These knuckles were designed for aftermarket only, and there you go, you have been warned. And if you're getting these knucks, you do want the most out of this car, so that stuff should have been upgraded already. Start by whipping out your 14th favorite ratchet and zap off the bolts that hold them Brembo and or stock brakes on. And to give you a tip for just a second, grab a zip tie and hang that sucker as not to damage your brake line and or frustrate yourself from having to hold it up at the same time. Now remove the disc from the hub, reach over and disconnect the ABS plug from the chassis, pop the line off the coilover, and head over to crack the locking nuts on the outer tie rod loose. Wind it all the way out, then zap the nut off the upper camber arm and move it out of the way. Along with getting that LCA shank nut off as well, make sure to support the knuckle as there isn't anything attaching it to the car now. Grab the entire question mark looking assembly and get it onto the operation table for some serious surgery. But before we go into the open arm surgery, we need to prep the chassis a little bit. Start by taking off the upper camber arm like so. Loosen and remove both nuts and bolts holding it in and pop that FUCA on out. But Dan, I'm installing knuckles. Why the hell am I taking off my FUCAs? Well, good sir, please prepare your mind for some more blowing. As stated earlier, the knucks have been designed for a lower caster value in mind, which again helps maintain proper contact patch, which equals more grip. Now with that being said, we need to drastically reduce the caster, and it just so happens that it is indeed better for that to change from the top, so that wheel stays central in the fender. If you're already rocking the Gktech camber arms up top, and good on you mate, you'd know that the cutout faces the front of the car whilst using a stock knuckle. With these new knuckles, you will need to flip the script and now have that facing towards the rear of the car, and a few things on that. If you have any other brand of FUCA, we cannot promise that they will work. These FUCAs are only to be flipped if running the Gktech knuckles. This is más importante, mi amigos. So reinstall by tossing the opposite side in. Toss those bolts up in there and then tighten those nuts down, torquing them to the specs shown here on the screen. This sus-ass imposter Lego block posing as a car part looking thing has a large flat side on one edge. Pop the Lego looking car part onto the shank. You want to set this so that the insert creates zero toe, and to simplify, if you were to draw two imaginary lines, your insert would be facing the true forward facing direction of the car, which essentially setting the knuckle in the correct position as shown on the screen. Then let me drop another mind-melting important message. You 100% must use a bearing retainer or uber high strength Loctite when installing this, and this needs to be used on both the taper of the Lego looking part and inside the LCA as well for good measure. There is no skipping this, and as you may have guessed, you do not want this part to move. You need to use a generous amount as well, and if you thought it was too much, well, you were incorrect. I'm going to go ahead and let John take over to explain just how much to use.
Look, I've put a lot of goop on in my time, but this time is different. You want to put as much as you would put on something delicious, something elegant, decadent, if you will. Something so outrageously delicious that when you whip it out of that hot steamer, spread those fluffy white buns apart and just plop, you have no choice but to lather on that goop. Watch that red love juice drip down that steaming little dog. No, don't stop there. Spoil yourself. Come on, who cares? The kids are with your mother-in-law and you can stay up as late as you want, right? Go with it.
I feel like I need a cigarette after that. To say things got saucy is an understatement. Anyway, put a generous amount of Loctite on and begin to assemble the rest of the shank, tossing on the top insert as shown, a washer, then the nut. Zap that on down, then tighten and torque that odd-looking unit to the specs shown on the screen. Now that the chassis is fully prepped, you've gobbled that glizzy from earlier, smoked another cigarette and had a shower, it's time to get the knuck prep. Zap off all 4 bolts holding on the hub assembly to the knuckle and give it a quick wipe, hopefully not with the rag you used earlier during the hot dog scene. Now go ahead and set that aside. One more thing to note is that if you bin the dust shield, you need to go dumpster diving and get that thing back. You need the spacing it provides for your brakes to line up all proper like. Now if you're a purist, you can run the dust shield as is like you can see on the screen. Then you just need to simply pop the hub on and bolt that down. Bam! If not, and you want to save 0.0069 pounds and or have a sleek look, you can cut it down as I will demonstrate here in our arts and crafts section of this install. Trace out the tan line of the hub with the white paint marker you for sure got from Gktech and cut that sucker out where you just traced like so. And next week we'll be tackling finger painting, so stay tuned. Grab that tiny bit of dust shield and pop it back on the nut, pop the hub on top and flip that bee over. Now tighten all of the Allen head bolts and torque them to the specs shown here on the screen in a nice crisscross pattern. Spin the hub to make sure you haven't botched the bearings somehow, and let's head back to the car. Slide the knuckle up the shank, then toss on the washer and nut. Now move the knuck up and slide the upper camber arm in as shown, shoving that nut and washer on as well. Whilst there, tighten and torque that one to the specs shown on the screen, then head down south and repeat the process, tightening the shank and torquing to the specs shown here as well. Extend the extender onto the inner tie rod and eyeball your alignment as straight as you can get with your highly calibrated peepers. Once done and calibrated, schlep the tie rod in and pop in the Ackerman adjustments and bump steer shims and adjust to your desired adjustment. Ours being neutral, like our 7th favorite country, Switzerland. done. And like most other suspension bits, make sure to put a heaping smattering of your favorite lock juice on before install. Go ahead and zap that down and then torque to the specs located on the screen. Once the toe is straight enough to get you to an alignment rack ASAP, tighten the lock nuts on either side of the outer tie rod end, then throw the disc back on the hub, throw the caliper back on the disc, tighten, then torque the bolts down to the specs shown here on the screen, then move on to the fun stopper, aka the lock stop. This is adjustable via washers you can stack in or out. Just make sure that your wheel doesn't contact anything before the knuckle does. You want that knuckle to hit the lock stop, go ahead and tighten that on down, pop the wheel back on, tighten and torque your lugs to spec, spin the wheel like you always do after installing a wheel, and guess what? It's now time to sit in the car, reflect on life, and whip the wheel to the left and right like you mean it. Now is a good time to check for binds, pops, and bangs, none of which are a good sign. If it is all good and smooth back and forth, not only do you have drop knuckles on your Z, but you have the ability to use up to 70 degrees of lock. I mean, that's practically forklift status at this stage in your Z's life. Congrats! You'll be doing backies and masking horrible driving with massive amounts of angle in no time. These are the dudes that make these videos, and they can be witnessed in front of your very eyes. And whilst we do miss Zach dearly while he's gallivanting around Japan, we do have a new member helping. That's DK, and no, not Drift King. We've got the Glizzy King as a replacement. Remember, this is only a guide. If you can't do this, reach out to a pro and have them do it for you. And if you have any questions, email us. This has been Officer Dan, Johnny Caps, and the Glizzmaster with another Gktech how-to. Peace. Would you just look at that goddamn beautiful piece of art, just doing his thing. Ah, what a world we live in.